Montana Territory, March 1883. The wind had a bite to it, cruel and sharp, as it swept through the high plains outside of Miles City. Snow still clung to the edges of the hills, but spring was pushing its way in, stubborn like everything else that survived out here. Kellan Hart rode with his hat low against the wind, a rifle strapped over his back, and a saddlebag full of supplies. He was not headed to town. He was headed to the farm no one spoke of unless it was in whispers. Folks called her too broken to marry, said she lost her mind after the fire. Said she talked to the wind, that no man could fix what had been shattered in her. Kellan did not care much for talk. He had been in town just long enough to hear the name Cassidy Cole. And once he heard it, something in him would not let it go. He remembered her, though she had not known him back then. She was the preacher's daughter once, years ago in Abilene, when they were just children passing by in church pews. She had laughed loud back then. It had stuck with him. Now she was here in Montana, alone in the house her husband had built before he died in the fire 2 winters back. Folks said she had run into the flames to drag out their 2 children. She had not made it in time, and after that she stopped talking to people, shut herself in. Stopped coming to town. They said she was broken. Kellan tied his horse at the edge of the pasture and walked the rest of the way. The house was still standing, barely. One side of the barn was caved in and the wind had peeled shingles off the roof, but the chimney smoked. Someone was alive in there. He knocked once, no answer. He stepped back just as the door opened and a shotgun barrel met his chest. Cassidy stood there, thin and pale, her eyes hollow and wild. Her hair was the color of wheat left too long in the sun. She did not lower the weapon. "I brought flour," Kellan said, holding up the sack, "and coffee. You mind I step in from the wind?" She stared at him, unmoving. "I knew you once," he said. "Abilene, you were 10. You sang louder than the choir." Something flickered in her eyes. The shotgun lowered an inch. "I remember you," she said, voice rough and dry. "You stole apples from the church kitchen," he smiled just a little, "and got whipped for it." She stepped aside. The inside of the house smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs. It was clean, though everything was worn through. Cassidy moved like a ghost, silent and wary. He set the sack on the table and pulled off his gloves. "You come all this way just for charity?" she asked. "No," he said. "I came because I do not believe what folks say." "I reckon you are still here, and that counts for something." Cassidy looked at him then, really looked. Her eyes were pale blue, clear and sharp even after all she had lost. She sat down slowly, hands folded in her lap. "I buried them out back," she said, voice flat. "Samuel and Sadie. They were 4 and 6. The fire took them before I could get to the stairs. I tried. I still hear them sometimes." Kellan did not flinch. He just nodded once. "I am not here to fix you, Cassidy. I am just here." She stared at the fire and they sat in silence. He came back the next day. And the next, he fixed the barn roof. Repaired the back fence where the snow had brought it down. Brought her a new kettle when he saw hers was cracked. She never asked him to stay, but she never told him to leave. One morning she brought him tea in a clean tin cup and sat beside him on the porch. The sky was pale gold and the snow had finally melted off the field. "I do not hear them as much anymore," she said. "The wind is quieter." Kellan looked at her, his voice low. "You are not broken." She shook her head. "I am not the same." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Neither am I. I lost my brother in the war, came home to a farm full of ghosts. I know what it is to survive when others do not." She closed her eyes. "I do not know how to be with people anymore." "You do not have to know," he said. "You just have to try." The next week she rode with him to the creek to check the traps. She did not speak much, but she smiled once when a rabbit tried to bite his glove. It was small, but he saw it. One morning he found her in the barn, kneeling beside a fresh pile of straw. A skinny calf blinked up at them, still wet from birth. Cassidy stroked its head with both hands, tears running down her cheeks. "It lived," she whispered. He crouched beside her. "So did you." She turned to him. "Why are you here, Kellan?" "Because you pulled your children from the fire and broke your own heart doing it. Because you stayed. Because you are braver than any man I have met." She leaned into him then, just barely, her forehead against his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her and held her there, quiet and steady. That night she cooked stew with the dried beans he brought. They ate by lamplight. Afterward she turned to him with her hands shaking. "I do not know how to love someone anymore. You are already doing it," he said. She kissed him, soft and uncertain. He kissed her back, slow and sure. The world did not shift. It just got quieter. Warmer. She did not cry that night, and he stayed until morning. The April thaw brought mud to the yard and green to the hills. Cassidy stood at the edge of her porch in her apron, arms crossed, watching Kellan kneel beside the plowshare he was reassembling. His coat hung from a fence post, and his shirt sleeves were rolled past his elbows. She hadn't asked him to stay, not with words, but his bedroll hadn't moved from the corner of the main room in nearly a month. "You ever break a horse, Kellan?" He looked up from the tools. "I have." She nodded toward the corral. "That bay mare's untouched. Samuel bought her just before." Kellan didn't ask what came next. He picked up his hat and walked toward the fence. The mare tossed her head, eyes rolling white. Cassidy stayed quiet, watching him move slow and loose, easy as creek water. When he returned an hour later with dust streaking his shirt and a split lip, she handed him a wet cloth without a word. He took it and sat on the porch step beside her, wiping blood from his mouth. "She threw me," he said. "I saw. She's got fight in her." "So did I," she said. "Didn't do me much good." He folded the cloth, set it beside him, and glanced sideways. "You're still standing." She looked off toward the cottonwoods. "When the fire came, I don't remember being afraid, just certain, like I already knew how it would end." He didn't speak. "I couldn't save them," she said. "But I remember Sadie's laugh, and how Samuel used to fall asleep holding that wooden horse I carved. That's what's left." Kellan's voice was quiet. "You think that's not worth something?" "I think it's all that's left of who I used to be." He reached across the space between them and touched her hand. "Then let's find out who you are now." The next day, Cassidy gathered the cracked leather-bound ledger from the kitchen shelf and brought it to the table. The pages held the last years of her husband's handwriting, milk yields, crop tallies, debts owed. She ran her finger down the margins and then looked up at Kellan. "I don't know what I'm doing." He pulled a chair beside her. "Then we'll learn together." They spent the next week walking fence lines and counting hens. She showed him the root cellar and the slope where water pooled after rain. He taught her how to spot a weak hoof, how to judge if the hay was too damp. She watched his hands as he worked, scarred, steady, capable. One gray morning, she found him hauling stones from the creek bed to shore up the foundation wall. She brought him a tin of salt pork and fresh cornbread. He took the food and sat on the low rock wall, his breath misting in the air. "You always this stubborn?" she asked. He tore a piece of bread, chewed and swallowed. "You always this proud?" She smiled, faint but real. "I used to be worse. That right? I wouldn't let Samuel fix the roof. Said I could do it myself." Her face turned wistful. "He let me try. I slipped and tore my skirt clean through." "What did he do?" "Told me I'd made it halfway further than he thought I would, then handed me a needle and thread." Kellan chuckled low in his throat. "He sounds like he was worth knowing." He was. Her voice softened. "But he's gone, and I don't want to be alone the rest of my life." He set the tin aside and looked at her. "Then don't be." Cassidy's eyes searched his. "You're not scared of what I've lost. I'm more scared of missing what you still carry." The light shifted through the clouds, casting long shadows across the grass. She stood, walked to him, and took his hand. "You're not just helping," she said. "You're building something here, I know. Then I want you to stay." He rose slowly, their hands still joined. "I already have." That night, she laid a second quilt on the bed and opened the window to let in the smell of wet earth. When they lay down together, she did not flinch. He did not rush. The quiet between them held every word they hadn't said, and none of it needed speaking. Come morning, the air was warmer. The mare in the corral stood still when Kellan passed. Her ears flicked forward. Cassidy laughed softly and leaned against the post beside him. "She's watching you. She's thinking about it." Cassidy looked up at him, brown hair pulled back with a strip of calico. "So am I." Kellan met her gaze. "Then I'll keep showing you who I am, every day." She nodded once and reached for his hand again. The mare turned and walked toward them. The last frost gave way to damp mornings and a soft haze that clung to the pasture until the sun cleared the ridge. Cassidy stood at the edge of the chicken yard, one hand shading her eyes, watching the horizon where Kellan had gone before first light. The mare had taken the bit easy this time, and he'd promised to ride south and barter for seed with the crow trader who passed through each spring. She hadn't asked him to trade on her behalf. He just took the ledger, ran a finger down the pages, and said, "We can't plant without barley. And there's no point in feeding that plow team if we've got nothing to turn under." By midday, she'd built a fire outside and laid out the copper kettle. The pump was stiff from disuse, but she managed to draw enough water for washing. Her hands ached through the wrists, and the muscles along her back pulled tight each time she bent toward the tub. Still, she worked until the linens hung heavy on the line, swaying in the breeze like quiet flags. A pair of riders passed along the road just beyond the cottonwoods. Cassidy stayed still until they were out of sight. She didn't recognize them, but she didn't care to be recognized either. The last time she'd gone into Miles City, a woman outside the mercantile had reached for her arm and said, "We prayed for you." Cassidy hadn't known how to answer. The weight of pity had followed like a second shadow. The wind shifted, and the scent of horses reached her before Kellan did. When he appeared at the trail's bend, he was leading a second horse loaded with burlap sacks. He dismounted with a grunt and handed her a satchel. "Flax seed, turnip, barley. Got you some tobacco, too. Thought you might want it for trading." "I don't trade anymore," she said. "You might again," he replied, tying the second horse to the rail. She opened the satchel and ran her fingers over the grain. "How much did it cost?" "Half that old bridle and a pair of gloves I stitched last week." She glanced up. "You're bartering with your own things now," he dusted off his sleeves. "If we're planting together, it's ours." The word hung between them, ours. She didn't speak it aloud, but it settled in her chest, low and warm. After supper, they sat under the porch awning while the sky turned violet. Kellan leaned back, boots crossed at the ankle, a tin cup resting against his thigh. Cassidy held a strip of muslin in her lap, threading a needle through the edge. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked without looking up. "Every day. I mean, not just the farm. Not just surviving." "I know what you meant." She paused, watching the last light catch the edge of his jaw. "I thought I'd never want anything again. Not really, not more than just quiet." "You still want quiet?" "I want quiet with someone in it." Kellan didn't answer right away. He reached behind him for the folded newspaper he'd brought from town. "There's a fella printing a local sheet now. Said he's trying to show people what's worth staying for." She looked over. "What's in it?" "Mostly nonsense, but there's a notice here." He tapped the corner. "They're looking for someone to help teach reading at the schoolhouse. Part-time." She folded the muslin. "I haven't taught since I was 16. You taught me how to tell a sick hen from a broody one just yesterday. That's different." "Is it?" She turned toward him. "You think I could go back to that?" "I think you never left it behind." The next week, he hitched the wagon and rode with her into town. She didn't speak on the way there, didn't hold his hand, didn't even look at him much. But she wore her hair pinned back, and she'd mended the hem of her dress with careful, even stitches. Inside the schoolhouse, the new teacher, a widow from Helena, greeted Cassidy with a quick smile and a bundle of worn primers. "You can start with the youngest ones," she said. "They just need someone to sit and sound out the letters. Most of them are cowhands' kids. They won't know you from before." Cassidy nodded once and stepped inside. Kellan waited outside on the bench until the bell rang. She came out with ink on her fingers and a faint crease between her brows. "How was it?" "They listened better than I expected." He helped her into the wagon and climbed up beside her. On the road home, she leaned against his shoulder and said, "I didn't cry." "You don't have to." "I didn't want to." That night, she placed his bedroll beside hers. No words passed between them. But when the lamp was out and the wind rose against the window, she reached for his hand beneath the quilt and held it until sleep took them both. By late May, the pasture had gone tall with wild rye, and the soil was warm enough to take seed. Cassidy stood at the edge of the north field with a basket of barley tucked under one arm, the other shaded against the sun. Kellan was already out past the first furrow, guiding the plow steady behind the oxen. His shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat, but he moved with a rhythm that worked into the land like breath. Cassidy stepped down into the turned earth. She followed behind, sowing seed with careful sweeps of her hand. They worked without speaking, the only sound the creak of the harness and the hush of barley falling. That evening, Kellan sat on the porch with his boots off, a shallow dish of warm water under his feet. Cassidy brought out a linen cloth and a small tin of dried juniper resin. "You favor your left leg when you're tired," she said, kneeling beside him. He tilted his head. Bayonet scar, shallow but it bit bone, never quite got back to right. She dipped the cloth and dabbed along his calf. "I should have known." "You carry yourself like someone who's had to fight past the healing." "I have." He watched her hands. "But you move like someone who learned how to keep going when no one came." Cassidy didn't look up. "That's true." They sat in silence, the air thick with the scent of sage. She leaned her shoulder against his knee, quiet and unhurried. The stars came out slow overhead and the night hummed with insects. "I wrote a letter," she said after a while, "to my sister in Kansas. Haven't seen her since the funeral. I don't rightly know what to say." "What did you write?" "I told her I stayed, and that I'm not alone here, not anymore." Kellan rested a hand on her hair, gentle. "You want her to come?" "I want her to know I didn't vanish." The next morning, Cassidy pulled a small wooden box from the cupboard. Inside were scraps of lace, 3 narrow ribbons, and a folded muslin shift. She laid the shift on the bed and pressed out the creases with her palm. Kellan paused in the doorway. "That yours?" he asked. It was Sadie's. She brushed the edge with her thumb. "I thought I might give it to the schoolhouse. There's a little girl with no coat. It'd fit her." He stepped forward slowly. "Are you sure? I can't keep everything locked away. I want those pieces to live again." He reached for her hand. "You're not afraid it'll hurt?" "It will. But I think I'd rather feel something honest than nothing at all." That afternoon, they walked the edge of the western property line where the cottonwoods gave way to low, sloping brush. Cassidy stopped near the split rail gate, her gaze fixed on the distant ridge. "I used to think I'd leave this place," she said. "Sell off the land, take what I could, and start over somewhere no one knew me. You still could." "I don't want to." She turned toward him. "You make me want to stay." He reached out and rested his hand at the small of her back. "Then we'll make it ours, not just the work, the rest of it too." Cassidy leaned into his side. "I never thought I'd trust someone again, not really." "You did," he said. "You just didn't notice when it started." They walked back together as the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long amber shadows across the field. When they reached the porch, Kellan paused before stepping inside. "I want to build you something," he said. "Something that'll last." "What is it?" He nodded toward the barn. "A table, big enough for more than 2, for whatever comes after." Cassidy stood still, her eyes searching his. "You think there's more coming?" He took her hand, rough and calloused against hers. "I know there is. If you'll have me here fully." She didn't answer with words. She kissed him slow, the kind that settled deep and certain. Then she pulled him inside and the door closed behind them. The night stretched long and warm, and for the first time in years, Cassidy didn't dream of fire, but of new wood, turned soil, and the steady presence of a man who stayed. The barley sprouted in neat rows, pale green shoots pushing up through dark soil. Cassidy stood at the edge of the field with her sleeves rolled and her hands on her hips, watching a swallow dart low near the ground. In the distance, Kellan was hitching the wagon, the morning sun casting a soft outline around his shoulders. He looked up when she crossed the yard. "I thought we'd haul the rest of the timber today. That oak near the creek's seasoned enough." Cassidy nodded. "I'll come. I want to choose the planks myself." They walked side by side past the chicken yard and over the rise where the trail dipped into a stand of young pines. The oak had fallen clean in the last storm and Kellan had already limbed it. He handed her a hatchet without a word and they worked in tandem, stripping bark and measuring lengths. "You still think about leaving?" he asked, kneeling to mark another cut. "No," she said. "But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had." He set down the chalk. "You'd have made a way same as you did here, but you'd have missed this." She leaned against the wagon rail. "I don't want to wonder anymore." They returned with the timber just before dusk, and Kellan set to work planing the boards in the barn. Cassidy swept the porch clean and brought out a bolt of blue ticking she'd found in the bottom of a trunk. She spread it across the table in the kitchen, smoothing the fabric flat with both hands by week's end. The new table stood in the center of the room, square and sturdy, with thick legs and a surface polished with beeswax. Cassidy traced the edge with her fingertips. "You built it like it was meant to stay." Kellan set a hand on her waist. "It was." She turned to face him. "I sent another letter to my sister. Told her about the school, the field, you. What did you say about me? That you work like the land belongs to your bones." He smiled, slow and quiet. "That's the best I've ever been described. She wants to come for the harvest, bring her youngest boy. I'll clear the loft," he said. "We'll need extra hands by then anyway." A week later, Cassidy stood barefoot in the tall grass behind the barn, holding a wooden yoke while Kellan adjusted the harness straps on the oxen. Her dress was damp at the hem from the morning dew, and her braid had slipped loose over one shoulder. "You ever think about a wedding?" she asked, her voice low but even. Kellan paused, then tightened the buckle. "Only if you want one. I don't want fuss, I want something quiet, just us." He looked up at her. "Then I'll carve the rings myself." They were married at the edge of the pasture, just beyond the cottonwoods, with the sun high and warm above them. No preacher, no guests, just the two of them, standing in the place they'd built together. Cassidy wore a blue calico dress Kellan hadn't seen before, and he had washed his shirt until it smelled of lye and smoke. He held out a ring he'd shaped from a strip of pine and rubbed smooth with river stone. "I made this for your hand and no one else's." She took his hand and slid a plain loop of braided horsehair onto his finger. "So you never forget the work." They kissed, soft and certain, and the world felt still for a moment, held in the hush between wind and grass. That night, they sat at the new table and shared bread with wild honey and fresh milk. Cassidy lit a second lamp, just because she could. As summer deepened, the barley rose gold and thick across the fields. Cassidy's sister arrived with her son in a wagon dusty from the road. The boy ran straight to the creek and came back soaked to the knees. Kellan showed him how to tie a slip knot and split kindling without cracking the grain. Cassidy sat on the porch with her sister, watching Kellan work with the boy. "He's not trying to be their father," she said. "But he gives what he has." Her sister took her hand. "You look like yourself again." Cassidy shook her head. "No, I look like who I've become." That fall they harvested together. The boy helped stack sheaves and Cassidy's sister stitched a new quilt from scraps of their old lives. At night, the house rang with quiet sounds, pages turning, soup simmering, the low murmur of voices that no longer carried grief. By the time the first snow came, the field was cleared, the barn was full, and the house held more than silence. Cassidy stood at the window and watched Kellan finish splitting the last of the oak. He looked up, met her gaze, and tipped his chin toward the door. She stepped outside, wrapped in her shawl, and walked to him. "We've got enough wood to last the season," he said, brushing snow from his sleeves. "And more besides," she answered. He took her hand. "You still want quiet?" "I want this," she said. "Just exactly this." Years later, the table still stood in the center of the house, scarred and smooth from use. The boy who had come with her sister stayed on, grown tall and able, and called Kellan uncle without being asked to. Cassidy taught letters and numbers at the schoolhouse 3 mornings a week. Kellan built chairs strong enough to bear the weight of years. They never left the homestead. They never needed to. In the evenings, when the light turned soft and the stove crackled with pine, They sat together by the fire, her feet tucked beside his, and watched the wind move through the barley stubble outside. It was not just quiet they'd found, but peace, earned, steady, and lasting.